So today's subject is the dance of Purusha and Prakriti. It's very important to understand this subject because many of the people who study Bhagavad Gita are unfortunately confused and by the teachings of Advaita Vedanta and the people who claim that Bhagavad Gita is all about Advaita Vedanta. It's not really true. Although there is some Vedanta within the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita is essentially a synthesis of various philosophies. You could even go so far as to say that it includes the 6 darshanas of the Vedas, which have been syncretized in a manner that all of them are now in heart. And the primary philosophy of knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita is not Vedanta. The primary knowledge as given in the Bhagavad Gita is essentially Sankhya. Yes, you will find Vedanta in various places, and I'll be happy to cover that another day. But today I'm going to discuss that Sankhya is the primary philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. Because if you see the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see a large part of the 3rd section of the Bhagavad Gita from text 7 to 12, or rather from 12 to 18, is essentially about Prakriti. It is also essentially about Sattva, Rajas, Tama. None of these are there in Vedanta. Vedanta teaches Sarva Khalva Idam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. There is no differentiation. Everything is one. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Sankhya philosophy says not only that there is more than one, it also says there are many. And it goes on to enumerate them. That is why it is called Sankhya. And because people who do not understand this, when they study Bhagavad Gita, they think Atman is equal to Brahman. At least in the Bhagavad Gita, it is certainly not true. Bhagavad Gita is very, very clear. What is Prakriti? What is Purusha? What is the individual soul? And if you don't understand this, you'll constantly keep floundering in the Bhagavad Gita and you will never make head or tail of what is really going on. So the Bhagavad Gita very clearly in the principles of Sankhya declares right in the beginning that you should understand, Krishna says, that in truth, Prakriti and Purusha have existed from the beginning of time. He never starts by saying everything is Brahman in Sankhya. He starts by saying that Prakriti and Purusha have been existing since the beginning of time. Those of you who have got your Bhagavad Gitas with you should go to Bhagavad Gita chapter 13, text 20. And in that verse, it clearly says, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Vidya Anadi Ubhavapi Vikaransh Cha Gunaunsh Chaiva Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavaha. Know that both Prakriti and Purusha are both beginningless. And know that all transformations of the physical body and the 3 modifications of nature are produced by Prakriti. So, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Vidyanadi Ubhavapi. That from the beginning of time, Purusha and Prakriti have existed. You can go now to chapter 14, text 3 to 4, 3 and 4. There, Krishna explains how this came about, how all of you came about, how all of us came about. Krishna explains that to start with, there was only Purush and there was only Prakriti. And Purush, Krishna explains, which is Krishna's superior energy, impregnated Prakriti and impregnated it with millions of souls, innumerable souls, all of whom are like little sperms that have impregnated Prakriti. So, to quote from chapter 14, text 3 and 4, Krishna says, Mama yonir mahad brahma tasmin garbham dadhamya aham sambhava sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharatah. He says, my womb is Mahat Brahma. And for those of you who have this Mahat Brahma mistranslated as Brahman, please cancel that translation and write that Mahat consists of the total entirety of Prakriti. It is the first involute of Prakriti. So on one side you have Purush, which is the superior energy of the Lord, and on the other side you have Mahat, also known as Mahat Brahma. And Krishna says that this womb, which is Mahat, the totality of Prakriti, I impregnate. Tasmin garbham dadamyaham. Purush impregnates this Prakriti. Sambhavah sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharata. So Krishna impregnates through Purush, Krishna impregnates Prakriti. And by impregnating Prakriti, he creates millions and millions and trillions of souls. And Krishna says, Sarva yonishu kaunteya, all other species of life, all other wombs, murtaya sambhavanti, or they are all created by this process. Yaha tasham mahad brahma mahat yoni aham prajapitah. And because I am impregnating Prakriti, and from this Prakriti I am thus creating all living entities, I am the seed-giving father. And what you have of Prakriti is from Mahat, Brahma Mahat. So you have Prakriti, which forms your body, mind, intelligence, ego, and you have the soul, which forms what you are. You can go back and you can read again. Krishna says, Bhumi apo nalo vayur kam mano buddhireva cha ahankara ityame bhinna prakriti ashtada. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These are but parts of my inferior energies. So all of them come from Prakriti. Your physical body, made of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. So all of these 8 separated elements, they are from Prakriti. And what about you? Aparayam itastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param jiva bhutam mahabhao yayedam dharyate jagat. And Krishna explains, but you are part of my superior energy. You are part of Purush. Therefore, you are a Purush, even though you are infinitesimal. And this infinitesimal Purush is part of the divine superior energy of God, which is Purush. And this Purush is sustaining and maintaining creation. Now this Prakriti and Purush combination is what you are. Everything about yourself which you can see, smell, hear, taste, touch, everything that you feel, your mind, your intelligence, your sense of aham, mam, mameti, I, me and myself, all these are part of Prakriti. Vinna Prakriti, they're all part of Krishna's inferior energy, which is known as Prakriti. And all of these are composed of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, which I have covered in great detail earlier. The individual soul is infinitesimal and is in association with this Prakriti. And how is he in association with this Prakriti? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains very, very nicely that this individual soul is situated right in the center of this Prakriti. And just like the sun illuminates the solar system with light, so also your individual soul pervades your Prakriti, which is your body, mind, intelligence, ego, it pervades it with consciousness. You can go to chapter 13, text 34, where Krishna explains this relationship between Prakriti and Purush. Yatha prakashayatya ekah. This is chapter 13, verse 34. Yatha prakashayatya ekah kritsnam lokam imam ravi. Kshetram kshetri tatha kritsnam prakashayati bharata. So Krishna is saying, just as one sun illuminates the entire solar system, so does the individual soul, which is Purush. It's an individual Purush. God is the supreme Purush who has impregnated Mahat to give rise to so many living entities. Each living entity consists of Prakriti, which is earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. And it consists of the individual soul. And that individual soul situated within that Prakriti illuminates the entire body with consciousness, just like one sun illuminates the entire solar system. And thus, Krishna explains to Arjuna, how are Purusha and Prakriti combined? Are they like your smoothie? Are they like a milkshake? No, they are not. Although they are situated together, although the individual Purush or the individual soul illuminates the entire body with consciousness, Krishna explains that just like the entire sky fills space but is not entangled with it, so also the individual soul or Purush lies within this physical body and pervades it, but yet is not entangled in it. Just like the sky, Krishna explains to Arjun, contains everything within it, just like space, just like the sky. It contains everything within it, and yet it doesn't get entangled with anything. Similarly, although the consciousness, although the individual Purush or the soul, which is often called Atman, but more of that later, it pervades the body. This Purush, this soul, is not affected by the attributes of the body. So, yatha sarva gatam sakshmad Akasham no palipyate, sarvatra avastito dehe, tathatma na palipyate. So this is the nature. Prakriti is pervaded by the individual Purush. And while it is pervaded by the individual Purush, this individual Purush is not able to control this Prakriti. Can you control your Prakriti? Have you never lost your temper? Have you never broken down? Have you been able to stop eating at the right time? Have you been able to control your weight? Have you been able to influence your Prakriti so that you can exercise? And you will see that you're constantly struggling with Prakriti. You're constantly struggling with your thoughts that often make you miserable. You're constantly struggling with your intelligence or intellect, which is confused by the inchoate vasanas or the unfulfilled desires which lie as seeds within you. And your obsession with I, me, and myself also results in your misdirection. And because you cannot control this Prakriti, it's because you are so infinitesimal. So Krishna says again that you are infinitesimal. That's why you are struggling with your mind and your senses. Mama evanso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana mana shastindriyani prakriti stani karshati. Clearly Krishna says that because you are a fragment of me, you are an infinitesimal fragment of me. Mamai vansho jiva loke. You are a jiva. This Purusha is a jiva. It's a very minuscule, infinitesimal Atman. And this infinitesimal jiva, Atman, Purush is struggling with the mind and senses. It's not able to control them. Why? Because you are so small, you have no power to control Prakriti, which is all connected. But in fact, who is controlling Prakriti? God is controlling Prakriti. Krishna says, Mayadhyakshena Prakriti Suyate sa characharam Hetunanena Kaunteya Jagad Viparivartate. So Krishna explains, he says, I am the Adhyaksh, I am the administrator, I am the controller of Prakriti. And I am controlling this Prakriti and all living entities. And you can't control Prakriti because you are infinitesimal and it is too difficult for you to control. It is, after all, God's interior energy, but it is his, shall we say, his divine energy. And this Krishna explains, Mamai vanso jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana mana shastindriyani prakritistani karshati. Prakriti is my divine energy. And therefore you are struggling to control it and failing. But when you surrender unto me, you can cross beyond it. Once you surrender unto the Lord, once you surrender unto the Supreme Lord, you are able to control, or at least you are able to transcend Prakriti. And therefore, your Prakriti becomes controlled. You are struggling to control your mind, you are struggling to control your body, you are struggling to control all these things. But unless you are totally surrendered to God, and you're remembering God in a manner and so that you forget self, only then can you transcend Prakriti. Only then will Prakriti behave in the manner that God desires for you. Indeed, everything that you do is not done by Purush. It is not done by the Atman. It is not done by the Jiva. It is indeed not done by the superior energy that you are, because you are infinitesimal. And because your nature is the same as God. And God also himself does nothing directly. So indeed, every time something is done by your Prakriti, you foolishly imagine that you are doing the activity. You do well academically, you get prizes, and you think, wow, wonderful, how brilliant I am, how hard I work. Whatever you do in the world, you think you have done it. Indeed, Krishna says, you have done nothing. Everything is done by your body, your mind, your intelligence, and your ego, all of which, Krishna says, is part of Prakriti. And he says in the Bhagavad Gita, Prakriti kriyamanani gune karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudatma kartahamiti manyate. All activities that you perform are indeed performed by Prakriti. But you foolishly imagine that you are the performer of those activities. You are misled, you are misguided. And because you are misled and you are misguided, you think that you are doing everything. Indeed, everything is done by Prakriti. And who is controlling Prakriti? God is controlling Prakriti. So Krishna says, Purusha Prakriti sthohi bhunkte Prakriti jan gunan karanam gunasangasya sad asad yoni janmasu. So Krishna explains that the individual soul who is seated within Prakriti desires to enjoy the three gunas. And because of that, he becomes, that attachment to that Prakriti becomes the cause of its birth in superior and inferior wombs. This is 13.22. But earlier Krishna says, Karya karanam kartritve hetur prakriti uchyate. Purusha sukha dukhanam bhoktritva hetur uchyate. Clearly, Krishna explains that material Prakriti is responsible for what is happening in the world. What's happening in your life is the result of Prakriti under the direction of God. The individual soul, Krishna says, is indeed experiencing, mistakenly it's experiencing happiness and distress because it thinks that it is doing it, because it thinks it's responsible. So everything is performed by Prakriti. Prakriti kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. The foolish individual soul, the mini Purush, the individual soul, the Atman, the Jiva who is seated within the Prakriti, he thinks he is doing everything. But in actual fact, all activities performed by Prakriti. And because he thinks he is doing it, he suffers or he enjoys. Now this Prakriti, which lies with your Purush, your soul, your Atman, your Jiva, this individual soul that lies inside of you, even though it is not able to control Prakriti without surrendering to God, this individual soul, Krishna says, is indestructible. In 2.17, Krishna declares, Avinashi tu tad vidhi yena sarvam idam tatam Vinasham avyayasya na kaschid kartum arhati. Know that what pervades the entire body is said to be indestructible. No one can cause the destruction of the imperishable soul. So indeed, my friends, this soul which lies within this Prakriti, it is indestructible. It is deathless. And therefore, no one can destroy it. It pervades the Prakriti. And Prakriti may change. You may become fat, you may become thin, you may become smarter and more intelligent. You may become emotionally intelligent and cognitively skilled, or you may become stupid and an emotional minefield. But the soul, which pervades this body of Prakriti, that is indestructible. There's a lot about indestructibility. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dati pavaka, na chainyam kledyanti apo, na shoshyati maruta. Indeed, you cannot be cut with a sword. The soul cannot be cut with a sword. It cannot be burnt by fire. It cannot be wet by water. It cannot be dried by the wind. So that individual Prakriti may keep changing. But the Purush, he never changes. He never does anything. He is simply an observer. And when he surrenders unto God, he is able to transcend the sufferings caused by Prakriti. Indeed, Krishna points out that Vasanshi Jirnani Yatha Vihaya Navani Grinati Naroparani Tatha Sharirani Vihaya Jirnani Anyani Samyati Navani Dehi. Krishna points out very clearly that just like you go home and you will cast off your worn off clothes and wear fresh clothes, so also at the end of this life, when the Prakriti, gross Prakriti you have is no longer useful for fulfilling your desires, you will cast off this gross Prakriti and you will move on to the next womb so that you can acquire a superior Prakriti or an inferior Prakriti, depending upon the activities in your life and the state of your consciousness. Because when you move from one body to the next, the soul does not move alone. The soul carries with it the subtle body. Actually, otherwise your Prakriti is changing all the time. All the time. Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tatha dehantara prapte dhiras tatra na muyati. From infancy to childhood to youth to maturity to old age, you're changing your body all the time. And at the time of death, you change your body once again. There's no doubt about that. So your Prakriti is changing all the time. But here Krishna explains, Shariram yad avapnoti yad chapya utkramati grihi tvaitani samyati vayur gandhani va ashayir. That the soul leaves this gross body behind of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. This flesh and blood is left behind. And you move on to another womb, carrying with you the impressions of the previous life, just like the breeze carries the fragrance of a flower. What does it carry? It carries the subtle body. It carries a bundle of vasanas or inchoate, unconscious desires. It carries with it thoughts patterns, speech patterns, behavior patterns that you have aggregated in this lifetime. It carries with it a bundle of karmas And this bundle of karmas is carried from one body to the next, just like the breeze carries the fragrance of a flower. So, this Prakriti keeps changing. And it depends, even in this life, it depends on the company you keep. So if you keep the wrong company, get drunk, take drugs, engage in all kinds of activities that are demeaning and degrading, even though you were born in the best of pious families, because your subtle body or your mind, intelligence and ego has been corrupted by the association of wrong people, kusang, what will happen? Asurim yonim apanam mudho janmani janmani. This Prakriti, which you have now formed, will be carried by your Purush, your soul, your Atman, your Jiva, from this body to the next body, into a womb which is more suited for the body, for the subtle body that you have corrupted. For the mind which you have enslaved to addictions, for that mind and desires which you have entertained by keeping wrong company, you will move. Asuram yonim, you will move into the wombs of people who are degraded. So fools move into degraded wombs. Whereas, if you have kept the company of saintly people, if you have kept the company of right-minded people, if you have kept the company of dharmic people, if you have kept the company of satsanga, then that satsanga will take you to a womb which is higher than the one you occupied before your present birth. And thus you will keep moving from womb to womb depending upon your activities. If you associate with bad people and have bad activities, you will move downwards. If you have good people around you and you have good activities, you will move upwards. So also, your Prakriti requires expression. And because your Prakriti requires expression, according to your Prakriti gunas and according to the activities you perform through those gunas, through that Prakriti, you will be given a Varna. That Varna will indicate whether you are inclined to be pious, holy, intellectual, research-minded, seeking to attain God, whether you are Tejo, Shauryam, Dhritir, Daksham, Yuddhe, Chapya, Palayanam, whether you will be full of brilliance, charisma, you will never retreat in battle, you will be generous in heart, well, then you could move into a different kind of activity and profession. It could be in the police, it could be in the armed forces, it could be in politics. And if you are engaged in creating wealth, and that creation of wealth could be through growing food, through animal husbandry, through commerce and trading, you will be born with the Prakriti to create wealth. And if you are simple and humble at heart, then you will be born into a family that will be engaged in service. But whatever Prakriti you are born with, you don't look at the Prakriti of another person. You do exactly what your Prakriti indicates, because that Krishna says is your Swadharma. That is your Swadharma. Because you're engaged in one kind of activity and you see somebody else growing richer in the other, don't say, no, 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 I want to do that. You do what you were born to do. Discover what is called Ikigai. You can read the book Ikigai. Find out your true activities which are natural to you and which are born to you. And when you perform all these activities as a sacrament to please God, you will attain perfection. If you allow your Prakriti to act according to its natural qualities, which God will dictate by acting through you, and you offer them as an offering to God without seeking the fruits of your labor, without falsely imagining that you are doing it, what will happen? Yata pravritir bhutana yena sarvam idam tatam swakarmana abhyachaya siddhim vindati manava. So Krishna explains that if you perform your God-given duties in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to please God, then you will attain peace, perfection in the supreme destination. Then God will guide you by controlling your Prakriti. You will progressively realize that you are Purush and not Prakriti. You will become a Sakshi, a witness to your activities. You will be guided into situations and circumstances where you will calm down your mind and your senses. You will meet a teacher or teachers who will guide you how to perform yajna, how to remember God and forget self, how to make your entire life a sacrament, how to consecrate all activities in your life as a means to remember God and forget self. Yat karoshi yad ashnasi yat chohosi dadasi yat tapasyasi kantaya tat purushva madarpanam. So whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities, whatever austerities you perform, everything do it for Krishna. Make your life a meditation upon him. Let your Prakriti flow under the guidance of God, because not one blade of grass moves without his consent. And thus, not aspiring to be the doer, not aspiring for the fruits of the activities, you will attain peace, perfection, and the supreme destination. So, at the time of death, remembering God, the Prakriti will go back to the Mahat. Earth will go back to earth, water will go back to water, ether will go back to ether, fire will go back to fire, earth will go back to earth. The mind will go back to the universal mind. The intellect, the buddhi, the ahankar will all be discarded at the time of death. And all of them will return to the Mahat. And the individual soul, the individual Purush, the Atman, will go back to God. So this is the dance between Prakriti and Purush, which is described in the Bhagavad Gita. And if you don't understand this aspect, which many people will not even tell you, you will remain entirely confused about Bhagavad Gita. But if you understand this, and you study the Bhagavad Gita, you will automatically rise beyond all suffering and attain union with God. So I will stop here. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Good morning, sir. Sir, first question is, why do Purusha and Prakriti do get engaged with each other when at the end they are supposed to get separated?
See, any fool can ask questions which the wisest man cannot answer. Why is this? Why is that? Why did God create me? Why did God create the world? All these actions, all these questions will be answered when you go back and reunite with God. And even in this life, if you follow what I am telling you, you will rise to that level of Sthita Prajna. You will rise to that level of being a devotee of God. You will rise to that level of being a yogi or a Jnana yogi, so that these questions will not answer at all. This is the philosophy of Sankhya. In truth, God is beyond understanding. He is said to be achintya. He is beyond conception. And because he is beyond conception, he is beyond questions and answers. If you read Vivek Chudamani, there's a beautiful verse which says that Shabda Jalam Maharanyam. Words are simply a net to ensnare the mind and drag you into the forest of delusion. Buddha was asked, why did this world come into being? And Buddha answered and said, a doctor was traveling through the forest and he came upon a man who had been hit by an arrow in his side. So the doctor went to the man who was injured and said, shall I help you to take out this arrow? Shall I heal the wound? Shall I bandage it? And the man who was injured with the arrow said, yes, but first you tell me, who shot me? Was it a Kshatriya? Was he a Bhil tribal? Was he some hunter who accidentally shot me? Tell me, what is this wood made of? Is it made of sal? Is it made out of bamboo? And this arrow head which has gone into me, should I know whether it is made of metal or whether it's made of stone? Please tell me that, then you can remove the arrow. So the Buddha said, stop asking stupid questions. Allow me to take out this arrow and let me heal your wound. Then all answers can be discovered. So why was there Purusha and Prakriti from the beginning of time? Why did Purush create individual souls with Prakriti around them? I'm just telling you what Bhagavad Gita is saying. Is that
Sure,
clear?
sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir. So moving to next question, can knowledge and awareness of Purusha and Prakriti be a true source of liberation for human beings?
Yes, indeed. In the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna directly explains that this realization of Purusha and Prakriti, and in fact, Upadrashta Anumantascha Bharta Bhokta Maheshwara Paramatmeti Chapyukto, the individual soul is accompanied by Paramatma. So you have Purush and you have the Supreme Purush in the form of Paramatma. And then you have Prakriti around it. So this understanding, not intellectual understanding, but this realization through the performance of yajna, through the performance of work as a sacrifice, through the activity of remembering God and forgetting self, by consecrating all activities in your life, by making your work into a meditation, by remembering God in such a way that you forget self. This realization will certainly help you to attain salvation.
Sure, sir. So, moving to next question. People usually consider themselves as Prakriti or part of Prakriti. So, how and why Purusha has forgotten who he is?
Because he is so small, he is so infinitesimal, and because he has ahankar. The connection between Purusha and Prakriti is ahankar. If he can diminish the ahankar, if he can diminish the sense of self, if he can diminish the desire to control, to possess, to enjoy, and to consider himself better than other people, if he can get rid of this idea of I, me, myself, if he can realize that everything happens by God's will, then indeed he can become free from identifying with Prakriti. Otherwise, Prakriti is so strong, and ahankar, as it grows stronger and stronger, you become deeper and deeper in illusion. And you get convinced that you are Prakriti. No one can shake that conviction. And it leads to tremendous suffering, not only for yourself, but people around you.
Sure, sir. So, sir, that's all for today. So, these were our questions for today.
So because Bhagavad Gita incorporates all the philosophies, Sankhya also, Vedanta also. So Purusha and Prakriti are part of God's superior and inferior energies, which create this universe. But beyond that, one level higher is the undifferentiated Brahman. So this is how Krishna has integrated them. So God lies one stage beyond Brahman. Krishna says, Brahmano hi pratishtaham. Krishna says, I am the source, I am the support, I am the origin of Brahman. So you have Krishna, you have Brahman, and then you have the superior and inferior energies, Prakriti and Purusha. This is how they are integrated in the Bhagavad Gita. And unless you understand this integration, you will always remain confused.
Sure, sir.
People are
sir,
welcome to email me with other questions or for further elaboration.
sure, sir. So, these are the questions for today, so for the session.
All right. So, Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.